Hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in to my presentation on the ethics of private war. In researching this topic, I learned a lot about the issue of private security contracting and how instrumental it is to our military. I am excited to share with you today my findings. Before we get into the presentation, I want you to reflect on these questions. Firstly, is it morally permissible to profit off of war? Secondly, is private war undemocratic? Consider these questions as we progress through the presentation. Now you may be asking, what is private security contracting? To help us grasp an understanding of this concept, let us go together to watch a video describing private military contractors.
This is Tony Sheena, owner of Mosaic Security, a private military company that provides elite forces level security for their clients. Tony has a VIP coming into Caracas tomorrow who will need to guard. While providing highly trained security for VIPs like Pablo is one role PMCs play, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. In fact, the international private military industry has been exploding over the last 20 years.
A private military company, a PMC, is private companies taking on roles that have traditionally been done by the military and intelligence agencies, by the broader national security complex.
A private military company, to me, is a company that is prepared to carry out full-on offensive military operations under a contract. You pay us a load of money and we will help you win your war.
We have this assumption of war and who fights it. A man in uniform, and that uniform to us means, well, they're part of a national military. And when you look at the 21st century, that image in our mind, it just doesn't hold true. These companies have taken on all the different roles of war, everything from the back-end logistics to training and consulting to the tactical battlefield roles. Pretty much it's the new American way of war. Whether you're talking about Iraq or now Afghanistan, roughly half of the force there is private military.
In fact, business is so good that the global market for private security services is projected to reach $218 billion in 2014. And as more and more aspects of modern war and security are outsourced to PMCs, these companies are poised to grow even larger.
Outsourcing is always about cost savings. It's the number of people that you don't have to call up from your National Guard and Reserves to take on these roles. Deaths, injuries, capture of private military contractors doesn't resonate into the political world the same way it does for someone in the military. So we're seeing everything from companies that have been operating in Iraq now doing things like counter-piracy operations off Somalia to the emergence of Chinese private security companies operating in Africa, or the Russians use private contractors during their Crimea operation. When we look at the future frontiers of the private military industry, they reflect the next frontiers of war.
PMCs are as American as Thanksgiving Day. First colonies were started by contractors that were hired to secure the logistics of private companies. Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth colonies were private endeavors. Look, I started Blackwater as a way to stay connected to the SEAL teams. When our customers called us, we ran very hard to fill their needs. We were mischaracterized as out-of-control mercenaries. And the fact is we were American veterans serving America again, getting paid on a competitively bid contract. Full stop.
How did you get into all of this?
So I left the army because the money wasn't good enough for what I was getting paid to do. Why would I do 5 years in Iraq in the army and earn 120 grand when I can do 2 years in Iraq and earn 400 grand? Certainly in my era, anybody who was any good in the army isn't in the army anymore.
So, to recap, private security contractors are private commercial enterprises that support military operations, combat-related or not. They include 3 broad areas: weapons and engineering, logistical support, and armed protection for specific individuals or events. The largest contractors contain familiar names: Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and even Boeing, to name a few. These companies are contracted by the military to conceive, design, manufacture, test, and ultimately deploy their products. Products include advanced aircraft, weapon systems, and vehicles such as tanks, helicopters, and nuclear submarines. It is clear that the U.S. is heavily dependent on military contracts, but we are not alone. Many other states, including China and Russia, rely on PMCs. So what's the problem? Well, as we will find out, it is almost always morally problematic to use PMCs because of a whole host of deeper ethical issues which arise from their use. Firstly, private contractors are motivated by financial gain. Therefore, they select the wars in which they fight. This alone raises issues of democratic control. The use of private companies allows governments to circumvent the democratic constraints usually used to decide whether to send troops into war. PMCs are not subject to the military's authority, meaning that when states rely heavily on them, they potentially jeopardize their ability to fight just wars, because private contractors cannot be required to make the ultimate sacrifice. PMCs can be used to start covert wars or expand participation in a conflict without public debate. In the past 20 years or so, the U.S. has relied on private contractors so heavily that at this point, the military cannot go to war without them. In fact, during the 2003 to 2010 Iraq War, at the height of personnel deployment in that region, there were roughly 160,000 military personnel, outnumbered by more than 210,000 private contractors. At one point, midway through Iraq, there were 1,800 private contracts awarded in one critical sector alone, overseen by a total of 2 military personnel who had been pressed into emergency services without prior training as program management specialists. This chaos, mixed with enormous sums of money involved, means proliferating opportunities for fraud and corruption. Real personnel have to try to negotiate and solve pressing logistical and security problems on a real-time basis, leaving opportunity for cronyism, bribery, graft, corruption, and greed. As a society, we hold true to ourselves certain moral values. In the United States, we value a strong central government for the people, of the people, and by the people. As it pertains to foreign wars, we put faith in our leaders to make decisions in the best interest of the people. We also hold true certain humanitarian ideals. These include certain defensive tactics that our military works by, such as not shooting until shot at. PMCs do not have to abide by these rules, often leading to excess and unnecessary conflict. All of this isn't to say that PMCs are absolute evil. In fact, there is nothing inherently wrong with PMCs. Certain theorists assert that if an adequate system of regulation were put in place, there would be little wrong with the use of private military force. National and international regulation could deal with many of the significant problems of PMCs. Contracting states, territorial states, which are states on whose territory PMCs operate, and home states, which is where PMCs are registered, all have legal obligation to ensure respect for international humanitarian law by PMCs. However, these obligations are not robustly enforced by states. If they were, many of the concerns over the violation of civilians' human rights by private contractors would dissipate. Private military contractors are not going anywhere anytime soon. They are the norm when it comes to fighting wars. Strict regulation, however, is needed to prevent some of the ethical dilemmas that come up when fighting with PMCs. Once again, thank you for tuning into my presentation. I hope I have evoked some productive thought on this topic. This concept has piqued my interest more than expected, and I am glad to have shared it with you today. Thank you.